In 334 BC, Alexander, king of Macedon, began one of the greatest military campaigns in history against the superpower of the age, the Persian Empire. He was only 20 years old, yet he led with brilliance and fearlessness, winning battle after battle. In a remarkable 10-year campaign that carried him to the edge of the known world, he created one of the largest empires ever known. Few individuals have exerted such a vast influence on the course of history. To the Persians, he was Alexander the Accursed. In the West, he was immortalized as Alexander the Great. Ancient Greece, beginning around 502 BC, was a rugged land that became the stage for extraordinary achievements in art, philosophy, and warfare. The two greatest city-states were Athens, a naval power, where democracy, art, drama, and philosophy flourished, and Sparta, a severe militarist society with a formidable army. In 480 BC, these two states joined forces to resist the invasion of the mighty Persian Empire. At the narrow pass, a small Greek force led by 300 Spartans held off a vast Persian army for 3 days before being outflanked and slain. Soon after, in the Straits of Salamis, the Greek fleet defeated the Persians, yet they could not prevent the burning of the sacred temples of the Athenian Acropolis. The following year, at Plataea, the Greeks won a decisive land victory and forced the Persians to abandon their invasion. The next 50 years were the golden age of classical Greece. Growing tension between Athens and Sparta and their allies ultimately led to war, drawing the Greek world into decades of ruinous conflict. Wars between the city-states dragged on for nearly a century, leaving them sacredly proud, yet weakened and vulnerable to a new rising power in the north. For centuries, sophisticated Greeks had regarded the mountainous kingdom of Macedon as a backwater barely Greek at all. But under King Philip II, Macedon became a fearsome military power. His most famous reform was the introduction of the sarissa, a pike 5 meters long, twice the length of the usual Greek spear wielded by trained infantry, fighting in tight formation, known as the phalanx. In 338 BC, at the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip's army defeated the combined forces of Thebes and Athens. Through alliances and conquest, Philip had already gained control over most of his neighbors. Now, after this victory, he united all Greece in a league known as the Hellenic League, or Corinthian League, with Philip as hegemon supreme commander. Only Sparta stood aside. Philip began planning a great Pan-Hellenic, or all-Greek, war against the Persian Empire. Their old enemy was a faltering superpower. Its vast wealth seemed ripe for the taking. But on the eve of war, Philip was murdered by his own bodyguard, the victim of Macedon's brutal court intrigues. He was succeeded by his 20-year-old son, Alexander, brilliant, restless, and left-handed, educated by the great philosopher Aristotle, and already an experienced commander. Alexander inherited his father's grand plan to invade Persia. But first, he had to secure his own position as king at home. He executed potential rivals, then crushed revolts in Illyria, Thessaly, and central Greece. He made a grim example of Thebes, razing the ancient city and selling its people into slavery. In the spring of 334 BC, ready to begin the war against Persia, Alexander led his army across the Hellespont into Asia Minor. It was the beginning of one of history's greatest campaigns. Alexander's army numbered about 40,000 drawn from across Greece. The infantry was commanded by the seasoned Macedonian general Parmenion. In the front ranks stood 9,000 Macedonian phalangites, armed with 5-meter sarissas, professional soldiers, well-trained and drilled, forming a 16-deep phalanx that presented a solid wall of iron spear points, almost irresistible head-on, though difficult to maneuver and highly vulnerable to flank or rear attacks. To guard those flanks, 3,000 elite infantry, the hypaspists, shield-bearers, armed with shorter spears, were commanded by Parmenion's son Nicanor. The second line consisted of 7,000 Greek allies and 5,000 mercenaries armed as hoplites, named for the hoplon, their large round shield, and carrying shorter 3-meter spears. The hoplite phalanx was less formidable than the Macedonian phalanx, but for its time it was well equipped and heavily armored. There were elite missile troops as well. Agrianians, renowned javelin men from the region of modern southern Bulgaria, along with other skirmishers from Thrace and Crete, armed with javelins, slings, and bows. The striking arm of Alexander's army was the companion cavalry, the hetairoi Phuan. 1,800 elite horsemen, armed with spear and sword, commanded by Philotas, another son of Parmenion. Alexander himself personally led the royal squadron. There were also 1,800 Thessalian horse under Callas, 600 cavalry from other parts of Greece under Arigius, and 900 mounted scouts from Thrace and Paeonia under Cassander. The great Persian Empire was divided into provinces called satrapies, each governed by a satrap. The satraps of Asia Minor, now threatened by Alexander's invasion, met to discuss strategy. Memnon of Rhodes, an experienced Greek general in Persian service, urged them to avoid battle with Alexander. Instead, he advised a scorched earth strategy: burn villages and crops and fall back inland. Alexander's army would soon starve. It was good advice, but the satraps would not abandon their provinces without a fight. They decided to meet Alexander at the river Granicus. The Persian army took position behind the river, shallow, but 18 meters wide, with steep banks. Their forward line was cavalry, about 10,000 horse from across the empire. Medes and Hyrcanians from modern Iran, Bactrians from Afghanistan, and Paphlagonians from Turkey's Black Sea coast. Behind them, in reserve, stood several thousand Greek mercenary infantry, a common feature in Persian armies, armed as hoplites with round shields and short spears. Perhaps the Persians were not confident these men would fight fellow Greeks. They placed them in the rear. Alexander, determined to strike and destroy the Persian force before it could withdraw, raced forward with his best troops. On the left wing, he placed the Thessalians, other Greek cavalry, and infantry under Parmenion. In the center, the powerful 6 Taxius phalanx under Perdiccas, Coenus, Amyntas, Philip, Meleager, and Craterus. On the right, Alexander himself with the companions under Philotas, the elite Hypaspists, the Agrianians, and archers. With 13,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, Alexander was probably slightly outnumbered overall. Ignoring advice to wait for dawn and a safer crossing, he ordered an immediate attack, sending the companions into the river, followed by a unit of Hypaspists and the light Paeonian cavalry. Calling on his men to show courage, Alexander led his right across. Midstream, they came under a hail of spears, javelins, and arrows. Those who scrambled up the far bank were charged at once by Persian horse. Alexander was in the thick of it, driving at the knot where the Persian nobles and commanders stood. A brutal melee erupted, horse against horse, man against man. The Macedonians sought to push the Persians off the bank and onto the plain, the Persians to force them back into the river. Alexander's assault seemed reckless, but it bought time for the rest of his army, including the unstoppable Macedonian phalanx, to ford the river. Suddenly, Alexander himself was in peril. 2 Persian nobles attacked him. Rusaces lunged and struck his head with a sword, splitting his helmet, though the helm saved his life. Alexander thrust him down with a spear, piercing his breastplate. Spithridates raised his blade to strike Alexander from behind, but Clytus, son of Drapides, cut off his arm from the shoulder, blade and all. Now the Greek army was across the river, and the Persian cavalry found themselves confronting a wall of Macedonian pikes. Most wheeled and fled. So swift and sudden was Alexander's attack that the Persian Greek mercenaries had not even joined the battle. Alexander, enraged by the bloodshed, or perhaps viewing these Greeks as traitors, ignored their pleas for mercy. Surrounded, the mercenaries were cut down. Alexander had won a great victory. Asia Minor now lay open to him. But the Persian Empire remained a land of immense wealth and power. It had already begun to mobilize its vast resources to oppose him, and if Alexander wished to conquer the empire and claim his place in history, he would have to fight Darius himself, the King of Kings. In 334 BC, Alexander, the 21-year-old king of Macedon, led a coalition of Greek troops against the greatest power of the age, the Persian Empire. He commanded an army of hardened veterans, its backbone the Macedonian phalanx, armed with the 5-meter sarissa, and his shock arm was the companion cavalry. Together, at the Granicus, they won the first decisive victory over a Persian field army. When Alexander approached the capital of the Persian province of Lydia, its commander surrendered without a fight. But before he could advance, Alexander had to neutralize Persian sea power. Persia possessed a powerful fleet and major naval bases along the eastern Mediterranean that could sever his communications with Greece. Rather than confront Persia at sea, Alexander chose to seize her nearest bases, the Greek coastal cities of Miletus and Halicarnassus. Both resisted stubbornly, but by winter they had fallen. The following spring, 333 BC, Alexander pushed on into Lycia and Phrygia. At Gordium, he was shown the legendary Gordian knot. A prophecy said, whoever unraveled it would rule all Asia. Alexander simply drew his sword and sliced it in two. Meanwhile, Memnon of Rhodes, the skilled Greek general in Persian service, led the Persian fleet into the Aegean and seized the islands of Chios and Lesbos. But after his sudden death from illness, the offensive collapsed. 18 months had passed since Alexander crossed the Hellespont. Now he led his men into Cilicia and prepared to cross the Amanus Range into Syria. But behind him, to the north, the main Persian army under King Darius III had appeared. Darius, determined to trap and destroy Alexander's army superior to it by nearly 2-1, moved to cut off its only line of retreat. He shifted his forces onto the coastal plain near Issus, only 9 kilometers wide between mountains and sea. The narrow field would force Alexander to fight, but it would also limit Darius's great numerical advantage. Darius's army, by some estimates up to 100,000 horse, included the finest warriors of his empire. Among them, 10,000 of his elite personal guard, the Immortals. His best cavalry massed on his right, near the sea, where the ground favored horses. Greek mercenary hoplites held the center. Persian infantry formed the left. Alexander deployed his own army for battle, again entrusting the left, nearest the sea, to Parmenion, with Greek cavalry and infantry. In the center stood the Macedonian phalanx. Alexander took position with his best troops on the right, toward the mountain slopes, his elite Agrianians and archers, with Hypaspeists and companions behind. Seeing the strength of the Persian cavalry facing Parmenion, he reinforced the left with Thessalian horse. Despite his numbers, Darius stood behind the small Pinarus River and waited for Alexander to attack. He did not wait long. Alexander addressed his men, urging courage and calling several by name. Then, at the head of his right wing, he advanced. Once again, the speed and shock of the Macedonian attack forced the enemy back. But in the center, the Macedonian phalanx, struggling to keep pace with Alexander, fell into disorder. Locked in a furious struggle with Darius's Greek mercenaries, the phalanx began to give ground. Seeing the danger, Alexander rallied and led the companions in a charge straight at the Persian center. Threatened on the flank, the Greek mercenaries were soon thrown back, and the Macedonian phalanx resumed its advance. Alexander fought his way toward the great king. Rather than face the seemingly mad and fearless Macedonian, Darius fled the field in his royal chariot. Meanwhile, on the left, Parmenian's wing fought desperately against Persia's finest cavalry. Had the Persians broken through there, they might have encircled Alexander's army and snatched victory from defeat. But Parmenion and his men held firm. When the news spread that Darius had fled, the Persian line dissolved. The battle became a slaughter. Ptolemy, one of the Macedonian commanders, later told Alexander that the Persian dead were so numerous, his men filled a deep ravine with bodies to cross it. The Battle of Issus was a stunning victory. Among the trophies were Darius's wife, mother, and 3 children, taken alive and treated with dignity by Alexander. As the Persian army retreated, Alexander turned to subdue the empire's western territories. In 332 BC, the Phoenician coastal cities submitted, ending Persian naval power in the Mediterranean. But the island city of Tyre resisted. The Tyrians fought bravely and skillfully. Even as Alexander built a causeway to the island, protected by 2 giant siege towers, they struck back with their ships. After 7 months, the walls were breached, and Tyre fell. Most of its people were killed or sold into slavery. Gaza, too, was besieged and taken. Alexander then advanced to Pelusium in the Nile Delta, where the Persian governor of Egypt surrendered the province and its royal treasury. In Memphis, the priests of this ancient land welcomed Alexander as liberator from Persian rule and crowned him pharaoh. At the Nile's mouth, he founded a new city, Alexandria. Then he journeyed to the oracle at Siwa Oasis, where, some said, the priests hailed him as son of Amun, king of the gods. Alexander returned east to Tyre, where in 331 BC he learned of trouble at home. Despite his great victories, many Greeks still saw him as a tyrant. The Spartan king Agis, with Persian backing, had launched a revolt against Macedon. Antipater, Alexander's governor in Greece, had just suppressed a Thracian rising. He marched south and met Agis at Megalopolis. Even the legendary Spartans could not match Macedonian power. The Spartan army was crushed, and King Agis fell in battle. With Greece secured, Alexander marched into the Persian heartland, seeking a final encounter with Darius. Darius wrote to Alexander, offering a vast sum of gold, his daughter in marriage, and half his empire in exchange for peace. But Alexander's dazzling victories and the voices of oracles had convinced him his destiny was to rule the world. He refused. He did not need half an empire. He would take all of it. In 334 BC, the young ruler of a small Greek kingdom had invaded a massive empire, an act that seemed impossible. Yet thanks to Greek military superiority and Alexander's fearsome leadership, he had won 2 great victories at the Granicus and Issus. Having seized Persian lands west of the Euphrates, he now advanced east into the empire's heart, seeking a final showdown with Darius. Hearing that a great Persian army, led by the king, had gathered at Gaugamela near modern Mosul in Iraq, he marched straight for it. This was Darius's last chance to stop Alexander and Alexander's chance to shatter the Persian Empire forever. Darius chose to fight on open ground, where his numbers would tell. His men labored to clear and level the terrain for Persian scythed chariots. Modern estimates put the Persian army at 50,000 to 80,000, drawn from across the empire. Infantry from Syria and Babylonia, cavalry from Armenia and India and Central Asia, up to 200 scythed chariots and even a few war elephants. Alexander's army was smaller, perhaps outnumbered 2 to 1. He deployed in his usual order. On the left, Thracian and Thessalian cavalry under Parmenion. In the center, the Macedonian phalanx with their 5-meter sarissas. On the right, Alexander with the companions and his finest infantry, the hypaspists. With these units, he planned to launch his main attack. Greek hoplites formed a refused second line to support both flanks and guard against encirclement. The battle opened as Alexander edged his right wing to the right, a move that startled the Persians. Was he attempting to outflank their vast army? The Persians mirrored his motion, drawing troops out of their center to extend their line and prevent Alexander from leaving the carefully prepared ground for the chariots. But Alexander's unusual maneuver was a trap to stretch the Persian line and weaken its center. Seeing it work, he sent his Greek cavalry to attack and pin the Persians in place. A massive cavalry fight erupted on the right. Darius, judging the moment decisive, unleashed his scythed chariots. The seasoned Egrianians brought down horses and crews with javelins, while Greek infantry opened lanes and let the chariots pass harmlessly through. Now Alexander hurled the companions and the Macedonian phalanx straight at the thinned Persian center, driving for Darius himself. The sudden, ferocious assault panicked the Persians. Their center collapsed and broke. Darius led the flight. But Alexander's left was in grave danger. Parmenion, under heavy pressure from Persian horse, was nearly surrounded. Indian and Scythian riders even burst through a gap in the Greek line, but instead of wheeling on the Greeks' rear, they galloped on to plunder the camp. Parmenion sent an urgent plea to Alexander. The king broke off the pursuit, regrouped, and struck the Persian right. It was the hardest, bloodiest fight of the day. 60 companions fell. At last, as news of Darius's flight spread, the remaining Persian horse turned and fled. Gaugamela was a crushing, complete victory. Ancient sources claim Alexander lost only a few hundred men, while the Persians lost tens of thousands. With Darius's great army shattered, the road to Babylon, the empire's chief capital, lay open. The Macedonian king entered the great city in triumph, acknowledged by Persian officials as its lawful ruler. The same occurred at Susa, where Alexander solemnly took his seat on the Persian royal throne. In the Zagros Mountains, at a pass called the Persian Gates, brave Persian troops held up Alexander's army for a month. The Greeks found a mountain path around them and encircled and destroyed the defenders. Early in 330 BC, Alexander reached Persepolis, the empire's ceremonial capital. He had wished to present himself to the Persians as liberator and lawful successor to Darius, but now he ordered Persepolis looted and burned, vengeance for the Persian invasion of Greece and the burning of the sacred temples of Athens in 480 BC. Alexander moved north to Media, where Darius had taken refuge at the royal city of Ecbatana. Determined to capture him, Alexander pursued. The fugitive king fled east, hoping to raise a new army in Parthia, Bactria, and Sogdiana. It was not to be. As Alexander closed in, Darius was murdered by his satrap Bessus, who proclaimed himself the new king. Alexander ordered Darius buried with his ancestors in the royal tombs of Persia. He then paused to set his vast new empire in order, appointing satraps to govern the provinces in his name, retaining some Persians who swore loyalty. Then he resumed the march east, intent on finding and executing the usurper Bessus, subduing the empire's eastern provinces, and reaching the far edge of the world. At just 22 years old, the ruler of a small Greek kingdom had invaded an immense empire. After a string of victories culminating at Gaugamela, he had taken the Persian throne. Now, in 330 BC, he pushed eastward to hunt down Bessus and bring the last provinces to heel. He turned first to Arianau in Afghanistan, where the Persian governor Sati-Barzanes rose in revolt after feigning submission. The rebellion was crushed. Sati-Barzanes was killed in single combat by a Greek cavalryman. Nearby, Alexander founded Alexandria in Aria, modern Herat I, of roughly a dozen cities he would found, most bearing his name. He moved on to Drangiana. The Macedonian court had a long tradition of plots and assassinations. Alexander's own father, Philip, had been slain by his bodyguard 6 years earlier. Now Alexander learned that Philotas, commander of the companion cavalry, had learned of a plot against his life, but kept silent. Philotas and his father Parmenion were among Alexander's most respected commanders and had been crucial to all his victories. But under torture, Philotas confessed. Alexander had him executed, then sent killers to Ecbatana to slay Parmenion's satrap there, before news of his son's death could reach him and allow him to act. In 329 BC, Alexander renewed the pursuit of Bessus. Along the way, he founded Alexandria Arachosia, modern Kandahar in southern Afghanistan. At Kunduz, Bessus was betrayed by his own men and handed over in chains. Alexander sent him back to Persia to die as a regicide. Alexander advanced into modern Tajikistan, where the Sogdians revolted. He fought off tribal attacks and stormed several towns. On the Jaxartes River, he founded Alexandria Eshate, Alexandria the Farthest, so named because he had reached the limits of the Persian Empire. Nomads the Greeks called Scythians often raided this frontier. Alexander lured them into a decisive battle by the Jaxartes and won a crushing victory that ended the incursions. Yet fighting Bactrian and Sogdian tribes continued, harrying Alexander and forcing him into a grueling guerrilla war. By now, many Macedonians were discontent. Most had not seen home for years, and their king seemed bent on endless conquest. Worse, he had begun adopting the dress and rituals of the defeated Persians' customs they considered effeminate and decadent. In Marikanda, modern Samarkand, after a furious drunken quarrel, Alexander killed Clytus the Black One of his finest generals, the man who had saved his life at the Granicus. Alexander was stricken with remorse, but his growing arrogance alienated more of his old companions. When he tried to compel his Macedonians to perform the Persian proskynesis prostration before the king, he crossed a line. To Greeks, only a god deserved such reverence. Alexander was forced to abandon the attempt. Another plot was uncovered in Bactria. This time the conspirator was a royal page one of the noble Macedonian youths serving at court named Hermolaus, embittered over an alleged injustice. He and his accomplices were tortured and stoned to death. Callisthenes, Alexander's official historian, was implicated as well. He was thrown into prison, where he later died. That summer, 327 BC, legend says Alexander was captivated by the beauty of Roxana, daughter of the Sogdian noble Oxyartes. Their marriage was also a prudent political step that helped end local resistance and allowed him to press on into modern Pakistan and India. Now Alexander prepared to subdue the empire's easternmost satrapies, which had not yet acknowledged his rule. To do so, he first had to cross the Hindu Kush and reach the valley of the Indus. Advancing in 2 columns, his army fought a series of actions against the Aspasioi and Asakanoi, pushing into the Swat Valley of northern Pakistan. After a fierce siege, Alexander took the Asakanian capital, Masaga. Legend says it was ruled by the beautiful queen Cleophas, who bore Alexander a son and was allowed to keep her throne. The ruler of Taxila, near modern Islamabad, made alliance with Alexander. Together they marched against King Porus. At the Battle of the Hydaspes, it was Alexander's bloodiest fight, as Porus's war elephants inflicted heavy losses on the Greeks. Despite the Indian king's courage, the battle ended in a decisive Macedonian victory that gave Alexander control of the Punjab. Alexander wished to push deeper into India to reach the great river that in Greek geography marked the world's edge. But at the Hyphasis today, the base his army mutinied. They had marched 1,000 kilometers, fought countless battles, and had not seen home in 8 years. Rumors spoke of giant armies awaiting them in India. They refused to go on. Alexander raged, but was forced to turn back. He followed the rivers of the Punjab to the sea, a journey of 10 months. En route, he defeated the Malians, but during the storming of their capital, he was wounded in the chest and nearly died. Reaching the coast, part of the army under Granicus took ship and returned to Persia by sea, through the Strait of Hormuz and into the Persian Gulf, one of antiquity's greatest voyages of exploration, for these waters were unknown to the Greeks. Meanwhile, Alexander led the rest overland, through the Gadrosian Desert today in southern Pakistan. Fierce heat and lack of food and water caused terrible suffering and heavy losses. Back in Persia, Alexander executed several satraps and governors accused of misrule and of plundering temples and tombs during his long absence. In Susa, he staged mass weddings on a grand scale, marrying Macedonian officers to 80 Persian noblewomen to bind the two realms together. Alexander himself wed 2 Persian princesses. He paid all his soldiers' debts and ordered 30,000 youths from across the empire trained in the Macedonian art of war. But at Opis, his Macedonians mutinied, offended by his open preference for Persian advisors and customs. Alexander executed the ringleaders and addressed his troops, reminding them of the glory they had won together. In the end, king and army were reconciled. At Ecbatana, Alexander's closest friend and confidant, Hephaestion, died of fever. The king was overwhelmed by grief, went without food for days, and ordered a period of public mourning throughout the empire. Alexander then campaigned successfully against the mountain raiders, the Kasaans, whom even the Persian kings had failed to subdue. Returning to Babylon, he was met by embassies from distant peoples, come to acknowledge his greatness: Ethiopians and Libyans, European Scythians, Lucanians, Etruscans, Gauls, and Iberians. His Bactrian wife, Roxana, was pregnant. But as he planned his next expedition to Arabia and beyond, he was suddenly seized by fever and died a few days later, at the age of 32. The cause remains unknown. Malaria, cholera, typhus, or poison? Alexander died unbeaten in battle. His reputation as a brilliant, fearless, audacious commander remains unshaken. His 10-year campaign forged one of the largest empires ever known, stretching from Greece to Pakistan. But it was vast and unstable, held together by his person and name alone. He left no will naming a successor, and his generals soon fought among themselves to carve out their own realms. During the wars of the Diadochi, Alexander's widow Roxana and his young son were murdered. His golden sarcophagus, bound for burial in Macedon, was seized and taken to Alexandria in Egypt. Its present whereabouts among the world's great unsolved mysteries. Few individuals have shaped history as profoundly as Alexander of Macedon. The breathtaking achievements of his short life ushered in the Hellenistic age, when Greek ideas spread across his former empire, mingling with the local traditions and fueling new advances in art, science, governance, and language. Some successor kingdoms were short-lived, others endured for centuries, but all in time fell to rising powers, above all, in the West, to Rome. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and be sure to share it with your friends.